value per share is the ratio of total stockholders' equity to the number of shares outstanding, and that is number of shares outstanding is issued, subscribed, minus the treasury shares. But following the trust fund doctrine, the total stockholders' equity that we will be using here should ignore the subscription receivable. So subscription receivable is a contra equity account that is a deduction to your subscribed capital stock in the equity section of your balance sheet. So the book value per share is the book value prior to the liquidation date. And prior to the liquidation date, there should be no outstanding balance as far as subscription receivable is concerned. That is why this item is ignored. So the total stockholders' equity should not consider the subscription receivable. Okay. The book value per share may be as 1. Book value per share on the ordinary shares, or the book value per share on the preference shares. So to get the book value per ordinary share, we need the ordinary stockholders' equity divided by the number of ordinary shares outstanding. Then we have here book value per preference shares, the preference stockholders' equity divided by the number of preference shares outstanding. And following the residual equity theory, okay, mauuna talaga si preference stockholders' equity on the liquidation. So, to get the ordinary stockholders' equity, that is just the total stockholders' equity minus the preference stockholders' equity. Okay? To get the ordinary stockholders' equity. Ang problema talaga ito, the computation of the preference stockholders' equity. Again, sabi natin last time, if there would be a liquidation value, then bigay mo lahat ng liquidation value. Then, kapag wala, that's the time that you will be using the par value. Then, item 2, if the preference shares are cumulative, ibigay mo lahat ng dividends in arrears. If the preference shares are non-cumulative, ibigay mo lang 1 year. Okay. Ito, with the recent communication with other reviewers, if the problem is silent, it is assumed na yung current dividend for the year ay hindi pa bayad. Okay? Nilinaw ko lang. Mamaya, makikita mo naman sa problem solving. Then we have the participation. So the rules on allocation will also be used para dito sa participation. Kasi the objective here is to compute for the excess. Okay? Once nagbigay ka ng dividend kay preference shares, magbigay ka rin ng dividend kay ordinary shares. However, the dividend for the ordinary shares should always be a 1-year dividend using the dividend rate from the preferred shares. Okay? If there are various preference shares, let's say 10% cumulative, 5% non-cumulative, you will use the lower dividend rate on the preference shares as the basis in providing dividend for the ordinary shares. And the excess should be allocated based on the aggregate par value. So here, we are required to compute the book value per preference and the book value per ordinary. Sabi natin last time, this is the total stockholders' equity. And step number 1 is to identify if the preference shares have liquidation value. Wala namang liquidation value, kaya ginamit natin yung par value. Then, sa dividend, is the preference shares cumulative, non-cumulative? Cumulative siya. So, ibigay mo lahat ng dividends in arrears. This is for 3 years. So, this is 2 million times 10% times 3 years. That is 600,000. So, this is 2.6 million. And the residual amount from the total stockholders' equity minus the 2.6 million is 1,220,000. Therefore, we will divide this by the outstanding number of shares. And the outstanding number of shares under preference is 20,000 shares. So this is 2.6 million divided by 130 divided by 20,000, that is 130. Then 1.22 million divided by the number of shares outstanding, which is 100,000. So the answer here is 12.2. Next, sa item 37, tinatanong yung book value per ordinary share. Okay. This time, meron ng liquidation value. So coming from 3.82 here, so bibigay mo dito yung liquidation value. The number of shares here is 20,000 shares times 120. That is the liquidation value. Will we provide dividends? Yes. Cumulative eh. So that would be 3 years. Kasi dividends in arrears, 3 years. So this would be 2 million times 10% times 3 years. Ingat ka doon. Why? Because the basis of dividends would always be the par value. Despite the meron siyang 2.4 liquidation value, hindi yan ang magiging basis ng dividendo mo. The par value pa rin. So 2 million times 10% times 3 years, that is 600,000. So this is 3 million total. And the residue is 820,000. Divided by again with the number of shares outstanding. You have 20,000 here, so this is 3 million divided by 20,000, that is 150. While here, 820,000 divided by 100,000, this is 8.20. Next. Dito, non-cumulative. Okay? So the total stockholders' equity is 3.82 million. Then, wala namang liquidation value, kaya binigay natin yung 2 million. Okay? Na preference shares, par value. Since this is non-cumulative, 1 year lang ang dividend. So that is just 2 million times 10%. So this is 200,000. And the total of which, 2.2, 3.82 minus 2.2, that is 1.62. This is the residue for the ordinary stockholders' equity. Divided by the 100,000 number of shares outstanding, so this is 6.20. Okay, let's go here to item 40. In item 40, may participation na, cumulative and fully participating. Okay, so here, objective, makompute mo yung excess. Okay, coming from the total stockholders' equity of 3.82 billion, follow the rules on allocation first. May liquidation value ba? Wala. So use the aggregate par value. Will we provide dividends? The answer is yes. Cumulative, so that should be 3 years. So that would be 2 million times 10% times 3 years, number of years in arrears, so that is 600,000. To get the excess, okay, so the par value of the ordinary shares should also be considered. So the par value of the ordinary shares is 1 million, and you will also provide dividend. If you provided dividend to preference, you will also provide dividend to ordinary. But this time, the ordinary should have a dividend, no, that is always equal to a 1-year dividend, despite na si preference ay cumulative. So this would always be a 1-year dividend. Okay? Using the dividend rate of the preference shares, which is 10%. So this is 1 million times 10%, this is 100,000. So this would now be the excess. Coming from 3.82 million minus 2.6 minus 1.1, this is 120,000. And the basis on allocation should be the aggregate par value. So the aggregate par value here is 3 million. 2 plus 1 is 3 million. So 2/3 of which is for the preference stockholders. So that is 120,000 times 2/3. So that is 80,000 here. And this should be 1/3. Okay, so 120 times 1/3. So that is 40,000. So the total here is 2,680,000. And the total here is 1,140,000. Divided by the number of shares outstanding, which is 20,000 for preference and 100,000 for ordinary. So the book value per preference share is 134 and 11.40 for ordinary. And the last problem here in the additional materials, ito, meron ng dalawa. The 10% cumulative preference shares, the 8% non-cumulative preference shares, but fully participating. And ordinary stockholders' equity, so tatlo. Okay? So let's have the requirements to compute for the book value per share for this individual securities. Okay. So, kay 10% cumulative, meron bang liquidation value? Wala. So, you will use the par value. Kay 8% non-cumulative, meron bang liquidation value? Wala. So, you will use the 200,000. Then, syempre, objective is to compute for the excess. Ibigay mo na rin yung par value ni ordinary of 1 million. Then, let's have the dividends. Since this is cumulative, so this is 2 million times 10% times 3 years. So this is 600,000. 3 years, that is the dividends in 3 years, no? For 3 years. Then here, this is non-cumulative, so provide 1 year dividend. So that is 200,000 times 8%, so this is 16,000. And again, as mentioned earlier, if there are several reference shares, you will use the lowest dividend rate related to the given preference shares. And the lower dividend rate here is 8%. So that would be 1 million times 8%. Okay? So the excess is 124,000. So coming from 4,020,000 minus 2.6 minus 216 minus 1,080,000. That is 124,000. That should be allocated based on the aggregate par value. Kung masyado ng marami yung items, parang mas nakakatakot na mag 2 over 3.2 ka, 0.2 over 3.2, 1 over 3.2. Okay? Kaya mas maganda, computein mo na lang yung allocation factor. The allocation factor is this. What is the amount to be allocated? 124. What is the basis of allocation? Aggregate par value. Okay, so the quotient of 124,000 divided by the 3.2 million, yan yung 0.03,875. That is now the allocation factor. If this factor is multiplied with the 2 million par value, makukuha mo na to. Okay, that is just the same of computing this by using 124 times 2 over 3.2. Okay, para hindi masyadong marami ang pinipindot. So this is 0.03875 times 200,000. So this is 7,750. 0.03875 times 1 million. This is 38,750. Okay, so the total here is 2,677,500, 2,23750, and 1.118750 divided by the number of outstanding shares, 20,000, 25, 100,000. Answers are 133.88, 89, 89.50, 11.19. Okay? So, yung common na tanong dito, yung nandito, paano yun kapag hindi naman siya participating? Ang kailangan mo lang dito should be participating para gamitin mo mas mababa. Pag non-participating, edi yung isa lang. Okay? So, this given preference share should be participating in nature. Okay? Next, punta tayo sa CE. Okay. Ito yung nature ng usual, no? Usual na solution ng book value per preference shares. Ang pinapagamit ko sa inyo, yung mabilis para makuha mo na kagad yung tamang sagot, then saka mo to gawin. Okay? Sample. Problem 1 sa CE. Okay. So here, ang tinatanong lang naman dito is the book value per preference shares. So if you will compute the total stockholders' equity here, that is 20 plus 50 plus 8 plus 30 plus 10 plus 2 minus 5, makukuha mo to. This is 115,000. Okay? 115 million. Okay? So divided by the number of ordinary shares outstanding, which is 20 million divided by 20. So that would be 1 million number of shares. So the book value per share here is 115 million divided by 1 million. So the answer is 115. Let's go to problem 2. So dito sa problem 2, eto na, yung madami na parang ginawa natin kanina. Okay, so there are 6 requirements and 6 independent scenarios, I mean. However, the requirement is just to compute for the book value per preference and book value per ordinary share. So let's have first item 1. So this is non-cumulative, non-participating. So there is no participation. Okay? The total stockholders' equity, 2 plus 8 plus 16 plus 24 is 50 million pesos. Okay? Follow the rules on allocation. Meron bang liquidation value? Wala naman. Kaya ginagamit mo yung par value. And the par value is 2 million pesos. Okay? Then, what should be? What amount of dividends that would be provided to this preference stockholders' equity? It says here this is non-cumulative. So that would be 2 million times 8%. Okay? And that is just for 1 year. Okay? And the residual value here, that is 50 million minus 2,160,000 is this. Yan. This is 2,160,000. 50 minus 2,160, that is 47.84 million pesos. Divided by the number of shares outstanding. For preference, that is 2 million divided by 50, that would be 40,000 number of shares outstanding. 2.16 million divided by 40,000, this is the book value per preference share. While here, this is 8 million divided by 20, so this is 400,000. So this is 47.84 million divided by 400,000, that this is 119.60. That is the first scenario. The second scenario is cumulative and non-participating. So the total stockholders' equity is 50 million. Meron bang liquidation value? Wala. You will provide the par value amounting to 2 million. Then, will we provide dividend at magkano? This is cumulative. So this would be 2 million times 8%. And the last payment of dividend is 2020. And we are now at 2023. So merong 3 years dividend in arrears. So that would be 2 million times 8% times 3 years. So this is now the 3-year dividend in arrears. And this is 2,480,000. 50 million minus 2.48 million. This is now for your ordinary stockholders' equity. Divided by, again, the number of shares outstanding, which is 40,000 for preference and 400,000 for ordinary. So answers are 62 for preference, and the book value for the ordinary share is 118.80. Let's have item 3. This time, non-cumulative and participating. Okay? Problem 3, non-cumulative and participating. So this is 50 million. Walang liquidation value. So provide the par value of 2 million pesos. Will we give dividends and how much? This is item 3, non-cumulative, so provide 1-year dividend. So this is 2 million times 8% times 1 year. And this is 160,000. And since item 3, may participation na, the objective now is to compute for the excess. Okay? So provide first the par value of the ordinary and the corresponding dividends that would be always equal to 1 year using the dividend rate on the preference shares. So this is 8% of 8 million. So this is 640,000. Okay, so this would be the total to 160 and 8,640,000. So the excess would be 50 million minus 2.16 minus 8.64. The excess is 39,200,000 pesos. And they should be allocated based on the aggregate par value. And the aggregate par value is 10 million pesos. Okay? To get the allocation factor, that is just 39.2 million divided by the aggregate par value equal to 10 million pesos. So the allocation factor would be 3.92 times the par value of preference. Makuha mo yung allocated amount for preference. 3.92 times 8 million. Makuha mo yung allocated amount for ordinary. Then the total of this, the total of allocated amount, this is the allocated amount, 7.84, and the allocated amount is 31.60. This is the total. Okay, so again, 3.92 times 2 million, that should be 7.84. 3.92 times 8 million, that should be 31.36 million. And the total would be 2.16 plus 7.84. This is 10 million. And this is 8.64 plus 31.36. This is 40 million. Divided by the number of shares outstanding, which are 40,000 for preference and 400,000 for ordinary. So this would account for the book value per preference. This is 10 million divided by 40,000. This is 250. While 40 million divided by 400,000, this would be 100. Okay? That is item 3. How about item 4? Cumulative and participating. Okay? Sample tayo. Problem 4. Compute for the book value per preference shares and ordinary share under item 4, cumulative and participating. Okay? 30 seconds. Please provide the book value per preference and the book value per ordinary. Or 1 minute, no? Post your answers in the chat box. Okay, sige, let's solve. While wala pa naman akong answer, pwede ka pa naman mag-post. Okay, problem 4, this is cumulative and participating. So this is 50 million, wala namang liquidation value, so this is at par again of 2 million. Since item 4 is cumulative, so that is 2 million times the dividend rate of 8% times 3 years, so this is 480. So a total of 2,480,000 here. Then objective is to compute for the excess. Okay, let's provide first the details of the ordinary. So this is 8 million par, and the dividend would always be a 1-year dividend using the dividend, the preference stockholders equity. Okay, so this is 8 million times 8%, 640. And the excess would be 50 million minus 2.48 minus 8.64. So this is 38.88 million divided by the number of shares outstanding. Okay, to get the allocation factor. So this is 38.88 divided by the aggregate par of 2 plus 8, that is 10 million. So the allocation factor would be 3.888 times the par value of 2 million. So this is 10.56. 3.88 times 8 million. This would be 39.74. So a total of, ito pala yung allocation factor. Allocated amount natin. So 3.88 times 2 million. This is the allocated amount, 7.77. And 3.88 times 8 million. So this is the allocated amount, 31.104. So this would be the total, 10.56 million, while here, 39.744. Okay? Divided by the number of shares outstanding. This is 40,000 shares and 400,000 shares. Answers in problem 4 are 256.4 under preference and 99.6 ordinary. While for item 5, these are cumulative and participating up to 15%. Okay. So participating up to 15%. Meron bang liquidation value? Wala. So provide the par value, which is 2 million. Will we provide dividend? Answer is yes. Since this is cumulative, so this will be times 3. So that is 2 million times the dividend rate of 8% times 3 years. So this is 480. While here, provide also the information, since our objective is to compute for the excess. So this is 1 million par value or 8 million par value, and this would always be again a 1-year dividend for ordinary using the dividend rate of the preference. So this is 8 million times 8%. So this is 640. A total of 2.48 and 8.64. Ang problema dito, class, is this. After getting the excess amount is 5 million minus 2.48 million minus 8.64 million. This is the excess. Okay, to allocate for this, by default, this is based on aggregate per value. However, it says in problem 4 that the preference shares are cumulative and participating up to 15%. Remember, ito yung ginawa natin last time, nasa stockholders equity. Remember that the company already provided 8% for the preference and sabi ng problem up to 15%. So the difference is 7%. Okay? So this would be the amount to be allocated for the preference stockholders equity. So that would be 2 million times 7%, and that is 140,000. Okay? And the remaining of the excess, this is 38.88 minus 140,000 belongs to the ordinary stockholders equity. So this would now be the total. 2.48 plus 140. So this is 26220, and this is 8.64 plus 38.40, 740. So this would be 48,380,000 divided by the number of shares outstanding, which are 40,000 for preference and 400,000 for ordinary. And the answer would be this. 65.50, and 118.45. Okay, let's move to problem 6. In problem 6, scenario 6, cumulative participating and have a liquidation value of 80. Okay? And have a liquidation value of 80. So, merong liquidation value. So, provide the liquidation value. Ilan na nga ang shares niya outstanding? So, that is 40,000, di ba? Times the liquidation value of 80. Okay? So, this is the liquidation value, 80. So, 40,000 times 80. So, that would be 3.2 million pesos. Okay? Then, cumulative daw, so provide dividend. But the dividend would be based on the par value. And the par value here is 2 million, di ba? 2 million times 8% times 3. Okay? Yan. And then, the ordinary stockholders' equity remains at 8 million. And the dividend would be 8 million times 8%. And this is now your excess. Okay? 20 seconds. Can you please compute for the book value per preference and the book value per ordinary under scenario 6? 30 seconds lang. Your time starts now. Okay. So here, the basis would be the aggregate par value, the basis of allocation. So you will not use the 3.2 million. So babalik ka dun sa 2 million plus 8, 10 million. Okay? So 37.68 divided by 10 million. This is now the allocation factor, 3.78. Okay? So this amount divided by the aggregate par of 10 million. Coming from the 2 million par here, plus 8 million par here, that is 10 million. So that is 3.768 times the par of 2 million. Okay, so this is the allocated amount for the preference. 3.768 times 8 million. So this is the allocated amount. And this is your total. Okay. So divided by the number of shares outstanding, which are 40,000 and 400,000 for preference and ordinary respectively. So this is now the book value per share, 280.4. And this is 96.96. Okay? How about problem 3? Ito class, kino-compute yan using this. Ito, ganito yung pag-compute niya. So sa problem 2 natin, yan yun. Yung in good form. Okay? Pero baka kasi matagalan ka. Okay? Kaya, huwag niyang ganito. Baka matagalan ka. Kaya pinapakita ko sa iyo yung isang way to compute for this. Okay? So let's now go to problem 3. Sa problem 3 class, maganda na to. Kasi kompleto na eh. Di ba kanina, ang binibigay lang sa iyo yung issued shares. So the issued shares, that is already your outstanding number of shares. Eh di ba ang kailangan naman natin outstanding. So you have your issued plus the subscribed minus the treasury. Tulad nito, may treasury. Okay? So, pinapakompute ka ng book value per preference and ordinary shares. Your step number 1 will always be the computation of the total stockholders' equity. In problem 3, we have here to 5 million plus 6 million plus 7 million plus 8 million minus 1.8 million. So the total stockholders' equity is 24,200,000 pesos. Okay. Next, computein mo na yung number of shares outstanding. Kasi may pagbabago na eh. Kasi meron ng treasury. Okay? So this is what? This is 50. Baba ko lang konti. 5 million. Baba natin. Yan. Okay. So this is for your 10% reference. And the par value is 5 million. Wala naman siyang subscribe at wala naman siyang treasury. So ito na rin yon, yung aggregate par niya. 5 million divided by 100 par value, and this is 50,000. Number of shares yan. This is number of shares. Okay. Here, the aggregate par or the par value of the ordinary is 6 million. Okay? And this should be TS, treasury shares. This should be at par because we are getting what? The aggregate par value. So this is treasury shares at par. And that would be number of treasury shares, which is 20,000 times the par value of 50. This is for ordinary. Nakalagay naman ordinary shares, OS. So that is 20,000 times 50. And that is your treasury at par. Okay? So this would now be the aggregate par. 5 million. This is 6 million minus 1 million, 5 million. The aggregate par is 10 million. Divided by 50 par value, this is now the number of shares outstanding. Okay? Tuloy natin. So the requirement is for us to compute for the book value for preference and the book value for ordinary. Okay? Balik tayo dito. So this is 24,200,000 pesos. Meron bang liquidation value? Check natin. Ang sabi, the preference shares are cumulative and each preference share has a liquidation value of 120. So bigay natin yung liquidation value. This is now the liquidation value, which is what? The number of shares outstanding, ilan na nga ulit ito? This is 50,000. Okay? Times 120. The liquidation value for each preference share. So 50 times 120. Ito yun. Okay? So that is 6 million. Okay, that is 50,000 shares times 120. So that is 6 million. Then, the dividend. Ang sabi, cumulative. So, you will always base the dividend on the par value. Okay? So, the par value here is 5 million. So, 5 million times 10% times the number of shares, the number of years in arrears would be the last dividend were declared in 2021. So, ang wala yung 2022 tsaka 2023. So, that would only be 2 years. Okay? So, this is 5 million times 10% times 2 years. So, this is 1 million pesos. Okay? Then, sabi niya, preference or cumulative lang naman pala ito. Wala naman palang participation. So, this would now be 7 million pesos. And 24,200 minus 7 million would be the ordinary stockholders' equity of 17.2 divided by the number of shares outstanding, which are 50,000 and 100,000. for 10% preference and ordinary stockholders' equity respectively. Okay? So, yan. 50 and 100. So, ang sagot natin dito, 7 divided by 50. So, that is 140. 7.2 divided by 100. So, this is 170. Okay? Next. Ang sabi niya, suppose the treasury shares have a cost of 800 instead of 1.8. Compute for the book value per ordinary for preference and ordinary shares. Ganun lang ulit yan, plus. Kasi babalik ka dito sa pag-compute ng total stockholders equity. We have 5 million, we have 6 million, we have 7 million, we have 8 million. The difference is the treasury shares. Ang sabi dito ay 800,000 na. So the total stockholders equity is 25.2 million pesos. Okay? Okay, so let's proceed. So this is 25,200,000 pesos. Again, there is a liquidation value amounting to 120. So the liquidation value here, ito. The liquidation value is ganun pa rin. Diba? That is 6 million pa rin. Coming from the number of shares outstanding of 50,000 times 120. Okay, so this is 6 million. Okay. Then, dividend pa rin, equivalent to 3 years. Tama, 3 years o 2 years. The last declaration was in 2021. So, wala siya ng 2022 tsaka 2023. But this would always be based on the par value. So, this is 5 million times 10% times 2. So, this is 1 million. And this is 7 million pesos. Then, 25.2 minus 7 million. So, this is 18.2 million divided by the number of shares outstanding, which are 50 and 100 for preference and ordinary respectively. So, the answers are 140 and 182. Okay, let's move to item 4. So, problem 4 class, ito maganda na. Kasi, kompleto na siya eh. Ay, walang treasury. O, sige. Kanina may treasury, ito wala naman. Okay, pero class, tingnan mo to. Merong subscription receivable of 200 and 300. So, kapag kinompute mo yung total stockholders equity to be used in computing for the book value per share, i-ignore mo to, yung subscription receivable. Okay, following the trust fund doctrine. So, this is 1.5, 6.5, 8 million, 12 million. Dito na siya, subscribe preference shares, 500,000. And subscribe ordinary share, 1.5. So, this is 30 million pesos. Your total stockholders equity. Then, since hindi na lang naman issued yung binigay, so compute for this. You have the issued for preference and subscribe for preference is 500,000. So, this is the aggregate par. So, this is 2 million pesos. Okay, divided by the par value of 10. So, there is a number of shares outstanding equivalent to 200,000 shares. But for, lagyan natin dito, preference. But for the ordinary, so we have 6.5 million pesos. And the subscribe ordinary shares of 1.5. A total of 8 million divided by the par value of 5. Okay? For ordinary, so this is 1.8 6 million. 1,600,000 shares. Okay? So, let's now compute. So, this is 30 million. Wala namang liquidation value. So, the par value is ito, 2 million. Aggregate par. Okay? And the dividend would be, yan sinasabi natin kanina na upon consultation with other reviewers, if the problem is silent, just provide a 1-year dividend. So this is 2 million times 6%. Okay? So this is now 2,120,000. And the ordinary would be 30 minus 2,120. So this is 27,880 divided by the number of shares outstanding, which are 200,000 and 1.6 million number of shares. Okay? So ito yun. Okay? So 200 and 1.6 answers are 10.60 and 17.43. Ito yun. Problem 4. Yan. 10.60 and 7.43. Ito gagawin ko kung hindi yung triangle approach ang ginawa. So this is problem 4. Let's move to problem 5. Yan. So dito class, this is a special case problem. Okay? Bihira na nga itong lumabas eh. Pero maganda na-capture naman sa ano niya, materials niya. Ito kasi, ang sabi niya, may deficit kasi ito eh. Yan, 3 million, di ba? If the preference shares have a preference as to dividends, okay, the computation would be preference shares would absorb part of the retained earnings based on the allocated amount, based on the aggregate part. Parang ito, 4 over 10, 40% ng 3 million, ito yun, 1.2. Okay? Then, yung remaining sa ordinary. So, ito na yun, 2.8 and 4.2 divided by the number of shares outstanding, which are 80,000 and 300 or 30,000. Ano ba ito? 300,000 shares. Okay? So, answers are 35 and 14. This is preference shares have a preference as to dividends. However, if the preference shares have a preference as to assets, the normal, para kang parang yung nag-provide ng dividend. Ito yung 7 million, that is 4 plus 6 minus 3, 7 million. The par value of preference is 4 million. And the dividend, since the last payment was made in 2020, so this would be a 3-year dividend. So that is 4 million times 12% times 3 years. That is 1,440. And this is 5,440. Residual amount 70 minus 5,440 is 1.56 divided by the number of shares outstanding. So the answer is here are 768 and 5.20. Okay? That is problem. Pabira ng problem na yan. Usually, ito yung ginagamit. Preference shares have a preference as to dividends. Okay? Let's move to problem 6. Ito, so problem 6 tayo. In problem 6 class, ito na yung kompleto. Sigurado naman kasi problem 6 na ito eh. Okay. Kung makikita mo, may subscription receivable na naman. Okay, syempre, hindi yan pinapansin. So, let's compute the total stockholders' equity para na-derive in 38 million na yun. 1.5, ito yun. 2.2, ito yun. 3.6, ito yun. 700,000, the subscribe, no? 200,000, subscribe also. 600,000, subscribe also. Okay, this is for ordinary. Then share premium of 18, retained earnings of 12. Okay, the succeeding subscription receivable 900, 100, and 400, ignore. Okay, magsisimula ka na dun sa 280. This is your treasury minus 320, treasury again, and treasury again, 200,000. Okay, so this is now the total stockholders' equity to be used, which is what? 38 million pesos. Okay, so again, what we need here is to compute for the book value for each class of share. Meron to tatlo. That is reference cumulative, cumulative and participating. Ganon din dito. Okay, reference are cumulative then and fully participating, but they have different rates. Okay, this is 12% and this is 8%. 12% and 8%. Okay, requirement, compute for the, but before that, let's have this kasi kompleto na, di ba? We have the issued times subscribe minus the treasury. So the aggregate par ang kailangan kasi natin. So for 12%, so this is 1.5. The subscribed shares is for 12% subscribe, nasan ka yun? 700,000 minus the treasury on the 12%. So this is 200. This should be at par, I mean. This should always be at par. For treasury shares, 2,000 times the par value of that security, which is 100. Kaya ito 2 million. Okay? So this is 1.5. The 700,000 minus 200,000, this is 200 pala. So this is 2 million. Okay? Again, what we need here is the treasury stock at par because our objective is to compute for the aggregate par value. Yan. Okay. So here, you have 2.2, 8%. Then we have subscribe. Subscribe 8%, 200,000. And the treasury for 8% is 8,000 shares times the 50. Okay? 8,000 times 50. So that would be provide you 400,000. Okay? Saan nanggaling to? This is par treasury. 8,000 shares times the par of 50. Okay? Next, we have the ordinary amounting to 3.6 million. Then subscribe is ito, 600,000. And the treasury, which is 10,000 times the par value of 20. So this is 200,000. Okay? So divided by the par value to get the number of shares outstanding. So the total stockholders' equity is again 38 million pesos. Okay? So here, merong liquidation value for 12%. So this is 120. So the number of shares outstanding is 20,000 shares times 120. So this would be 2.4. Okay? As the par value, as the liquidation value of the 12% preference share. Next, we have the second 8% preference shares with 60 pesos liquidation value. So that would be 40,000 number of shares outstanding. That's the liquidation value of 60. So this is the par value is 2.4. And the par of ordinary is 3.6. Okay. Since this 12% is a cumulative preference share. So this will receive a dividend equal to how many years? Since the last paid dividend is 2020. So there would be a 3-year dividend. And you will use the par value. And the par value here is 2 million. No? 2 million times the rate of 12% times 3. So this is now the dividend for the 12% preference shares. Then we have here cumulative then. So the par value here is 2 million times 8% times 3 years. Okay, so this is for 80,000. Then provide a dividend here equal to 1 year using the dividend rate. The lower is 8%. So that is 4 million times 8%. That is 320,000. And these are the totals. Okay, again, objective is to compute for the excess. And the excess is 38 million minus 3.12 minus 2.88 minus 4.32. And this is 27,680. If you want to get the allocation factor, this should be 27,680 divided by the aggregate par of 8 million. Okay? So this is 27,680 million divided by 8 million aggregate par. So the allocation factor is 3.46. 3.46 times the aggregate par of reference 12%, which is 2 million. So I think it's good. Okay? That is 3.46 times 2 million. While the amount here is 3.46 times 2 million also. Ito yun. Okay? So this is 6.92. Then here, ganun ulit. So this is 3.6 times 4 million. So this is 13,840. So the total of this 3,120 plus 6,920 is 10,040,000. Then the other two are 9.8 and 18,160 divided by the number of shares outstanding. Ito yung isang schedule na importante dito. This is 20 plus 40, 20, 40, and 200,000 number of shares outstanding. Okay? So these are now the corresponding book value per share. So that is 502, 245, and 90.80. Okay? So that is your book value per share.